In the pine forests of southwestern Ontario, a cluster of white-painted wooden buildings stands in various stages of decay. The verandas sag, the paint peels in long strips. But the buildings still face south, still angled toward the sun, still suggesting what they were built to be: a place of healing, of fresh air, of light. This is Queen Alexandra Sanatorium, built to save children from tuberculosis, in a place where the cure, radical separation from everyone who loved them, sometimes cost more than the disease itself. If histories like this one pull you toward the places themselves, you're welcome to subscribe. The year is 1905. Tuberculosis kills more Canadians annually than any other disease. It moves through tenement housing and factory floors with democratic indifference. The medical consensus of the era organizes itself around one principle: separation. Remove the infected. Create controlled environments of clean air, controlled diet, and rest. For children, this meant something more radical than adult sanatoriums. It meant complete removal from family, because the family, in the language of public health, was not a home. It was a transmission vector. Ontario's legislature authorized Queen Alexandra in 1908. The question of what total separation would mean for a sick child, psychologically, developmentally, was never raised in the legislative record. The question raised was whether the facility would be large enough. The trap was already built. It was framed as a hospital. Before we continue, if this kind of history pulls you toward the places themselves, we made a travel guide for exactly that. 40 dark history sites across Canada. Where to go, what to look for, what happened there. Link is in the description. Dr. Frederick Fallis arrived as Queen Alexandra's first medical superintendent in 1910. Trained at the University of Toronto. Published on pediatric pulmonary disease. 38 years old, certain. Fallis believed tuberculosis treatment required total environmental control. Total meant total. Patient's mail was reviewed before delivery. Letters describing family illness, financial hardship, or emotional distress were withheld on the grounds that psychological distress compromised recovery. Visits were restricted to Sunday afternoons, 30 minutes, through a wire screen, preventing physical contact. For children under active treatment, visits were suspended entirely. He documented all of this in his annual reports. As evidence-based and progressive, the Department of Health approved his budget renewals every year. What his reports never mentioned was what the nursing notes document: children who stopped eating, who stopped speaking, who developed what nurses called institutional grief, a term that appeared in their notes, but never in his. Fallis retired in 1938 with a commendation from the Ontario Medical Association. He was never investigated. He died in 1951. His personnel file described his performance as exemplary throughout. The campus was designed by architect George Miller, who believed in the therapeutic power of the natural environment. Wide verandas facing south, children wrapped in blankets in Ontario winters, breathing what the era called pure air. The children's wards held between 15 and 25 children in iron frame beds, spaced precisely 3 feet apart, the minimum distance at which one child could not reach another child's bed. The administrative building sat between the main pavilion and the entrance gate. Every visiting family passed through it before reaching the wards. The mail room was inside. Letters were sorted there before distribution. At the end of the east wing, a room labeled on the floor plans simply as quiet room. 4 beds, a door that closed. Children moved. They were understood by staff to be dying. The door was kept closed because the ward nurses had learned that the dying disturbed the other children. By 1940, Queen Alexandra held 312 children in a facility designed for 180. Children from Northern Ontario, where poverty made tuberculosis rates significantly higher, arrived in numbers the facility could not serve. The visit policy hardened. Families from Sudbury, from Kapuskasing, from communities 10 hours north, could not afford the train fare for regular Sunday visits. Records show visit rates declining steadily through the 1940s, not because families stopped wanting to come, but because the financial burden made it impossible. The mail review continued. A nursing note from 1943 reads, "Patient asking again about letter from mother. Advised that correspondence is under review. Patient cried through the evening meal. Whether the letter was ever delivered is not recorded. Between 1940 and 1952, 847 children were admitted. 193 died during treatment. A mortality rate of 23%, flagged in a 1952 internal audit as statistically anomalous. The audit recommended investigation. It was marked confidential. The facility's funding was renewed without change. Numbers, even horrifying numbers, can become abstract. So let us remember 3 names. Eleanor Marsh was 8 years old when her mother brought her to Queen Alexandra in March of 1931. Before admission, she collected wildflowers, pressed them between book pages, and was halfway through a library copy of The Secret Garden. At Queen Alexandra, Eleanor was classified as active for 7 months. No visits permitted. Her mother wrote 47 letters, 1 a week and sometimes more. Every letter was opened in the mailroom, assessed, and held. None were delivered to Eleanor. Eleanor died in May of 1932 in the quiet room at the end of the East Wing. She was 9 years old. Her mother's postcard arrived 4 days later. 3 weeks after Eleanor's death, her mother came to collect her belongings. The 47 letters were found bundled in the administrative file, still in their envelopes, unopened. Her mother never knew that Eleanor had never received a single word from home. Thomas Birch was 11 when he was admitted in September of 1944 from Sudbury. His father worked in the nickel smelters. Before Queen Alexandra, Thomas held the county record for the 100-yard dash for boys under 12. His parents visited twice in 19 months, both times through the wire screen. His father wrote to his brother after the second visit. He was sitting in a wheelchair, and he looked at us like he was trying to remember who we were. Thomas was discharged in April of 1946. He returned to Sudbury and never ran again. Not from physical limitation, his sister said, but because he had lost the desire for forward motion. After his death in 1989, his sister found a notebook in his belongings. He had written the date of every Sunday during his 19 months at the facility, beside each date, whether his parents had visited or not. Most dates had nothing written beside them. Margaret Fournier was 6 years old when she was admitted in January of 1949 from Kapuskasing, 12 hours north by train. Her parents visited once, in the summer of 1949, after saving for 6 months. Her nursing notes describe a child who asked daily when her mother was coming. The notes record the nurse's responses. They do not record what was said when weeks of asking became months of silence. Margaret recovered. She was discharged in November of 1950, 22 months after admission, 8 years old, having spent more than a quarter of her entire life separated from her family. Margaret is still alive. She has spoken publicly about Queen Alexandra twice. Both times she said the same thing, that she understood, as an adult, why the separation was considered necessary, that she had never, in 70 years, been able to make herself feel it was right. She has never received an apology from the Ontario government. The 1952 audit was written by statistician Arthur Wensley. He ran the mortality calculations 3 times. A 23% rate was not consistent with comparable facilities in other provinces, where rates ran between 8% and 14%. He recommended direct investigation of individual case files. His report was submitted to the Deputy Minister of Health on September 12, 1952. It was marked confidential. The investigation was never conducted. The 1953 budget was approved unchanged. Wensley retired in 1967. He never discussed the audit publicly. The document was released under a Freedom of Information request in 2003, 51 years after it was written. Wensley had been dead for 11 years. Not one physician, not one administrator, not one government official was ever held accountable for anything documented in that report. In 2003, Ontario acknowledged that practices at Queen Alexandra did not always reflect contemporary standards of patient-centered care. It named no policies, named no individuals, issued no apology. In 2011, Margaret Fournier submitted a personal request for acknowledgement to the Ontario Ministry of Health. She received a form letter expressing regret for any distress experienced. The institutional logic of Queen Alexandra, that state medical authority, superseded family judgment, that evidence of harm could be classified and managed did not die with the facility. The residential school system operated simultaneously, applying a structurally identical logic to Indigenous children across Canada. The 2021 Truth and Reconciliation Commission documented more than 4,000 deaths, with mortality rates in some facilities exceeding 50%. Male review policies in Canadian federal prisons persisted without meaningful independent oversight until 1992. The subjects changed. The conviction remained that institutions know better than families what the person in their custody needs. The property still exists outside Ingersoll, Ontario. The main pavilion still stands. The verandas have partially collapsed. The paint peels. The south-facing windows, the ones designed to admit maximum light, are intact in some wards and broken in others. Music. The cemetery on the northeast corner holds 94 marked graves. Some markers bear only numbers. The records linking those numbers to names exist in the Ontario archives. They have never been cross-referenced in any publicly accessible format. There is no memorial, no plaque. The building is listed as surplus government property. The mail room is still there, shelving intact, empty. The quiet room at the end of the east wing has no door anymore. It opens directly onto the ward. There are 2 Queen Alexandras. The first was a genuine medical institution that contributed to declining tuberculosis mortality in Ontario. The medical science it practiced was not pseudoscience. The second withheld letters from dying children, suppressed an audit, separated families for months and years, and sometimes permanently, and when confronted with evidence of harm, chose classification over accountability. The first was a hospital. The second was proof that institutional authority, exercised without oversight, produces harm regardless of intention. How many letters were withheld across the full span of Queen Alexandra's operation? The audit covers only 1 decade. How many children died in the quiet room without a family member present who had wanted to be there? Why was Wensley's audit suppressed? What calculation determined that transparency cost more than continuing? And why has no Ontario government managed to apologize to Margaret Fournier, who is still alive, who was asked? The 47 letters Eleanor's mother wrote were found bundled in a file after Eleanor was gone, sealed, addressed, unread. They exist somewhere in an archive still. We do not know what they said. Some things do not change simply because the institution that created them has closed.